Hello and welcome to the Not Ready for Primetime podcast. We're Gary Seath and Brad Robinson.
And you're not.
This week, we are talking about Season 3.
All of it.
It's our recap show. It's just us talking about Season 3.
Can't get enough of that.
No, clearly. But Brad, you want to start the episode by thanking people.
We should. Obviously, we just want to thank everybody for listening. We had a blast doing it this season, and we just want to thank everybody for listening and all the comments and people who wrote in for the Anyone Can Host episode. And if you haven't, as always, please leave a rating and review, especially going into Season 4. Try to get the word out before next season.
Absolutely. One other thing, if you haven't, please feel free to email us some comments, good and bad.
Yeah.
At our email address, notready4ptpod@gmail.com.
And to what I'm sure is just a very small portion of our audience, if you're not sure how to, stop laughing. If you're not sure how to leave a rating or review, just ask a younger person and they'll gladly show you how to do it, I'm sure. And our guest, we had some great guests this season that we want to thank. Some returning friends, of course, John Snyder, Thomas Senna, Andy Hoagland. Always love having you guys on. Mark Malkoff from Inside Late Night. Andy Dick, that week in SNL, we're happy to get on. And Michael Streeter, who wrote the great Tom Schiller book. So thanks for all you guys joining us. And you know what? Thanks to James Andrew Miller, who was supposed to be on the show this season and totally ghosted us. So let's just say it. Thanks a lot, bud.
All right. Well,
this isn't like my Bill Murray, ha ha ha, he's going to be on the show. James Andrew Miller was legitimately supposed to be on.
He was. Well, that's a lot of thank yous, and we do appreciate everyone listening. But
yes, now, in all seriousness,
let's talk about Season 3, because I think Season 3 is a complicated season after watching all
you don't
of it.
like it. You don't like it. You're not a fan.
It's funny. I was going through all of this, and I was trying to reconcile, do I like Season 3 more or less than Season 2? Because I really enjoyed Season 2.
Mm-hmm.
And we've talked about this. You've laid out for me, the highs are higher, the lows are lower. And I think that holds true. And I think for me, some of the lows are just so low that it's kind of hard for me to get past some of that.
Right. Okay.
But at the same time, I will say going through the sketches and trying to pick my top 5 sketches for the season was very difficult.
It's hard, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Because there's a lot. I mean, there are a lot of good bits in this season, and I really enjoyed those. There was also a lot I didn't like.
I'm sorry. Did you answer your first question? Did you like it more or less than Season 2?
Oh, no, I never answered my question.
Okay.
I feel like I'm still chasing that. I can't say for certain. I still think I like Season 2 a little bit better, though, as a whole.
As a whole.
Yeah.
Right. As a whole. I think I would give Season 3 a slight edge. As a whole, I think on the show, and John made an interesting comment when he was on his episode about, because it resembles what the show is more for the last 40-some years, a little bit more than Season 2 did.
Right.
That actually might play a little bit into it, but I think the highs were higher. I think there's a lot of things they started doing better in Season 3. I'm sure we'll talk about pre-tapes and commercial parodies and stuff that I think just help overall elevate it a little bit higher for me overall as far as enjoyment. Season 2, I think, is just in its own kind of weird little compartment of what it was. And because of what it was, I love what Season 2 was.
Yeah.
But I think if you look at the output, the product that was put out throughout the course of the season, I think Season 3 is a little better, and I think I like it a little more.
Yeah, I think that's why I like Season 2 a little bit better, is because it's not as formulaic and it was a little different. Now, there were a lot of stunts in Season 3, like Anyone Can Host, and that took up big chunks of not only the show that Michael Spellman hosted, but also the Buck Henry episode prior, where they introduce all of the finalists and everything, and it just felt like a little gimmicky in that chunk of the season.
And see, I kind of like the gimmicky stuff. We'll get into it a little bit more, but I think they still held on to enough of that to make Season 3 as a total package really good.
Yeah, again, it's not a bad season. It's just, I think we've talked a lot about expectations coming into this season.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for me, it was a very slow ramp up into enjoying whole episodes or more episodes. That's what it was. Yeah.
I agree. I think once they got there, I agree it was a little bit of a slow ramp up, but I feel like once they got up there, they stayed there. Like I remember in the middle of the season, like OJ Simpson, Art Garfunkel-ish area, like even quote unquote bad episodes were fun to watch and enjoyable for the most part. And I feel like in past seasons, you either had really good or really bad. There wasn't kind of a big, thick middle area, if you will.
Right. But in that grouping that you're talking about was what we both agreed was the worst episode of the season with Jill Clayburgh.
Well, you can't win them all. I mean, to your point, higher highs, lower lows. Looking through my rankings for the first 3 seasons, my 3 top favorite shows of the first 3 seasons this season.
Right.
But my least favorite show from all 3 seasons, also from this season. So, yes, you're right. Higher highs, lower lows.
Yeah.
I should say 3 of my top 10 worst episodes are this season. So,
All right. So let's start talking about the things that we really liked from this season. Some of our bests.
Okay.
Let's just start at the top.
Number 1, best Gary Tigerman song. Go.
Let's start with best host. Who did you have for your best host of the season?
I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer. Steve Martin. I mean, first off, he hosts 3 times.
Yes.
But I think his performance in episode 18 with the Blues Brothers, I think it's a pretty top to bottom stellar performance. As a host, he's in a bunch of sketches. He's got reoccurring characters, some that we've seen before. He's started new reoccurring characters with Theodoric of York. It's my favorite monologue of all time. So I went with Steve Martin.
Okay. I don't agree. I mean, I agree that Steve Martin hosted the best episode ever, and he was amazing in that episode. But for me, my favorite host for this season was Charles Grodin.
My number 2.
Yeah. What he did for that show and how he made it his own thing for 90 minutes, I thought was very interesting. And I happen to really like Charles Grodin.
I mean, he was my second choice, or my number 2. I agree. I think he did a great job. It's a rare instance of season 3 being different and out there. And I think he does a great job with it. And it's an amazing kind of standalone example. Not surprised.
I mean, I think those two, it goes without saying. I do have an honorable mention, though.
I do too.
My honorable mention is Ray Charles.
I
think he did a great job as a host.
He did.
And a musical performer.
Yeah.
I was very impressed by his show.
Not bad. Mine was Robert Klein. I thought Robert Klein did a great job returning to the show after hosting in season 1. Some great sketches. We got some new characters that episode, and I thought he did a really good job.
And it was an improvement over his first episode too. Now I know that episode in the first season, there were a lot of behind the scenes things that made that show not perfect, but he was excellent in his episode. I agree. Mm-hmm. Where do you want to go next? Do you want to talk about musical guests?
Yeah, we did host. Why not? Musical guest. You go for it. Who's your favorite musical guest?
My favorite musical guest was Billy Joel. I think the 2 songs he performed are wonderful, amazing songs, and the order in which he played them I thought was perfect. And in an episode where Chevy Chase hosted and there were very high expectations, I think, for that, I think part of that kind of fell a little flat, but I think he delivered as the musical guest on that episode.
He was my number 2 as well. I went with Elvis Costello. It's iconic, it's memorable, and it's one of those things where we've kind of mentioned a little bit where there's glimpses of what season 2 was and kind of the danger of live TV. And this is one of the rare instances this season where, granted, it wasn't the writers or the comedy, right? It was the musical act representing that. And, and he played 2 great songs. That also helped. It was a fun episode. But so I went with Elvis Costello.
Yeah, he was my number 2 as well. Same reasons that you said. I enjoyed him. How about we get into the cast now?
All right.
It doesn't have to be the cast, but who was your MVP of the season?
Whoa, MVP jumping right there.
Yeah.
Bill Murray.
Yeah.
Took him a while in season 2 to find his footing. I think Bill Murray showed up in season 3 ready to go. He shined on the Weekend Update desk in the Stargazers bit.
Yes.
We got more Nick the Lounge Singers. We see him in the Nerds. We see him in Olympia Cafe. But more than anything else, how many times we would watch a sketch and he would just steal it.
Yep.
It would not be a Bill Murray sketch, but we'd find ourselves talking about Bill and a little side action or a comment or look Bill Murray would do. And I think he did that consistently throughout the season. And I went with Bill.
I also went with Bill for a lot of the same reasons. He carried sketches like Nick the Lounge Singer, but he also as a supporting player, I think was very strong. And just the little elements that he added to some of the bits that he was in were immeasurable. It was great.
Yeah. He made good sketches great, and he made bad sketches funny.
Yes. He was in some of my favorite sketches that we'll talk about later that maybe were forgotten or didn't totally hit the mark, but he really elevated them to another level, which I really liked. Now where do you want to go?
Well, if we're talking about cast, we should get into some of what they do.
Yeah.
Impressions?
Okay.
I don't know. Any best impressions this season?
I do have a best impression, and it's a little, I don't know if out there's the right thing, but it's a little.
Because there's not a lot.
No, there's not
a lot of and going through, there's not nearly as many impressions. You know, as we talk about the change from like season 2 to season 3,
right?
And they start making these reoccurring characters and going to the masses, they seem to pull away from impressions.
Yeah,
especially new impressions. There's a couple old ones, but there's not. It's more characters this season than impressions.
Yes, and so my best impression is actually an impression of an impression, and it's Jane as Mom Snyder. When she does Tom Snyder's mom's impression, it's her impression of Dan's Tom Snyder. That was my favorite.
I had that in my reoccurring character catalog because she does do this quote unquote character again.
Right.
So I was kind of cheating. And since it was not a real person, I was considering it a character. But yeah, it's very good. It's fun. It's great.
Yeah. Yeah. How about you? Who do you have for your best impression?
I had two that kind of tied. And not only are they from the same episode, they're from the same sketch.
Oh.
And I have Paul Schaefer and Garrett Morris from the Robert Klein episode, the cold open. Paul Schaefer doing Don Kirshner for the first time, and just in general, I think it's a great impression. It's just really funny, and he really hits home. And Garrett's Tina Turner is great. I mean, when we talked to Paul on the show, even he was raving about how like there's nothing Garrett Morris can't do, even in 4-inch heels. So I think those are my two that I enjoyed the most.
Yeah, the Don Kirshner was on my list of best impressions. I didn't register the Tina Turner, but you're right. That was excellent. He really did a great job on that.
I had a sleeper pick that we only saw once. It was early in the season and it was in a very bad episode, but we both loved these particular impressions. And it was from the episode 3 Hugh Hefner episode when Bill Murray and Lorraine Newman played Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn. In the old film clip, because just watching the two of them, those impressions were so funny. And that's kind of my honorable mention, is watching the two of them pull that off.
That's a very good one. That was a lot of fun. Should we go to recurring characters that we were introduced to this season?
Yeah, like, we just kind of mentioned it was a very character heavy season, whether it's characters that we had a holdover from season 2 and we got a lot of them back again, or also we got a whole slew of new characters that we see over and over again, or will continue to see over and over again. Yeah.
Characters that play a large role moving forward in the show. Who was your top pick?
My top, I will admit too, I feel like this was tough. There were a lot of great characters. I feel like, if anything, we knocked the season a little bit about going too broad and going too mainstream. And with that came all of these characters. Yet when I go through the rundown, I actually liked a lot of them, like a lot. But I gave my top to the Fest-Drunk brothers, Dan Aykroyd, Steve Martin. By the time they get to that third Steve Martin episode, I think it's just one of the best sketches. And I think those characters are fun to watch, especially the evolution of them from episode 1 and Steve's first time hosting the season to the second to the third. So they're so well written. They're great characters for both Steve and Dan to dive into completely. And you can just tell they give it their all and they're enjoying it so much.
Yeah.
And they bring in other characters like Garrett's character, Cliff, and the women, whether it's the American foxes or the European women who come on. It started off a little slow, like a lot of recurring characters do. Their first outing, getting their footing. They didn't really have all the beats there fully formed. But by the time we see them that second time, and especially the third, so good.
I totally agree. That's who I had as my number 1. My number 2, because I thought this was hard. I had 3, 1, 2, 3. My number 2 were the nerds, and just seeing them, again, the evolution of these characters, where they started out with Robert Klein and not really as just the pair, but it was a threesome at that point, and then the evolution of them throughout the season, and then knowing what they become. I think that was really interesting to watch that evolution this season.
Yeah, I didn't really rank after number one, but I had a handful of them after that. The nerds were definitely up there. Judy Miller. I thought Judy Miller was a great character. You know, we only see it a couple times, so technically recurring. We will never see it again. But the performance Gilda does with that character, I think, is just great. The first one is amazing. The second one is just a little bit of a notch below it. Olympia Restaurant, which is weird because I don't really find it. It's not really recurring characters. I mean, it is, but it's more just the premise and the sketch. For some reason, it's not, to me, it's not about the character. It's about the sketch. But that's another great one.
I had Olympia Cafe because I thought it is a sketch, but John and Bill and Dan and Lorraine, they all play the same characters.
Oh, it's the same characters. Yeah. Totally. I just, for some reason in my mind, though, maybe because it's so ensemble.
Yeah, I think
like it's not about John running the restaurant, really. It's about all these people in the restaurant. Probably because Bill just steals those scenes every time.
It's true. It's true.
And Jane does a really great job in those sketches.
Yep.
But no, I had to put that up there. And you know, it was weird. I put Father Guido Sarducci on the list. Not that his actual performance was that great, because we only see him once at the very end of the season, but technically introduced to this season. And as a character overall, like in the arc of all 5 seasons, I do love that character. So just the fact that this was when we saw him.
Yeah. No, that's a good call. And that's one that I overlooked.
And then I did have a special mention. This is where I put the Emmylou Snyder, Tom Snyder's mom.
Yeah.
An honorable mention for me, Gary. Honorable mention. Episode 2, Madeline Kahn. I went with The Dancing N.
You know, it's funny. When I was looking through, I do. When I was looking through that, I was wondering if you were going to mention The Dancing N. So I'm not surprised that you picked that, and I'm glad you did. All right, Brad. So ranking the episodes was interesting for me because, like I said, I think the highs were high, the lows were low, and then it was that middle ground that was a whole lot of trying to figure out where things went. But number one on both of our lists should be, and it is.
Oh, it is.
The episode hosted by Steve Martin with musical guest the Blues Brothers from April 22nd.
I still put it up against anything. Maybe over the test of time, 50 seasons, it's not the best episode of all time anymore, but I still put it up in easy top 5. I put it up against anything.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the number of sketches that we went through and we're like, well, this is a classic. This is a classic.
Yeah.
It's just phenomenal, top to bottom.
Yeah. I mean, you're going to see at least 3, if not 4 clips from that at the 50th anniversary this year.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And then in our 2 lists, in our top 5, then I think we had consensus in our top 3.
Yeah, 2 and 3, we switched a little bit. Yeah. I had the Robert Klein episode as number 2, followed by Charles Grodin. You had Charles Grodin number 2, followed by Robert Klein. They're both amazing episodes. And it's what I think is so funny about these. Our top pick is what everyone thinks of SNL. It's a quintessential SNL episode. 2 and 3 are the only other 2 times really this season they go outside the box.
Yeah.
Robert Klein has that amazing attack of the atomic lobsters to end the show, which is completely out of left field and amazing. And then Charles Grodin just has the episode long runner meta bit that he does. So it's interesting. Those are both of our top 2 and 3 combined, or those 2 make it.
Yeah. And they are so different, I think, than the rest of the season. And that's why I really liked them. Again, for me, it kind of goes back to more of what they were doing in season 2, both of those episodes. So I really enjoyed those. And then 4 and 5 for us were very different.
Yes, but I, like you mentioned, I got to say, like 4, 5, I don't know, 6, 7, 8.
Yeah.
Like I feel like based on what you're thinking and you're talking about could all be interchangeable. I feel like my 4 and 5 changed throughout the season as I was moving and rethinking about things. But yeah.
Yeah. And I honestly, mine changed, up until this morning before we recorded this podcast. I've had a hard time settling on things, but I finally settled on number 4 for me being the Michael Palin episode. I just think, kind of in the vein of the Charles Grodin and Robert Klein episodes, Michael Palin brought his own sense of humor and sensibilities to that episode that I really enjoyed, starting with his monologue where he pretends to be his agent. And we saw that in different bits that he was in throughout the episode. So I just really enjoyed that as a whole, even if nothing particularly stood out or stood above everything else for me.
Mm-hmm. And your 5?
My 5, I went with Ray Charles in the end. I think that episode, I really enjoyed it because, like I said earlier, I think Ray Charles did a great job as the host, not someone who you would expect to have necessarily good comedic chops like we've talked about, but he did. And he came in and in the sketches he was in and a part of, I felt like he delivered. And then he sang some good numbers as well.
Yeah. Four, I went Steve Martin, the second time he hosted with the Dirt Band and Randy Newman. I feel like that could just be still a high of me liking that April 22nd episode. And then number 5, I had Art Garfunkel, which as I kept moving stuff around, he kept popping up. And then I'm like, Art Garfunkel's in my top 5? But it's a great episode. Like, it's a really great episode. Yeah. So I don't know.
The Art Garfunkel episode, when you look back on it, is surprising to me how much I liked it. But looking through our best bits throughout the season and what we had a lot of them in that episode that we really liked. Even if on a whole, I didn't love that episode, there were a lot of parts of that we really enjoyed. So I get it.
Yeah. And then we both have Christopher Lee as number 6.
Yep.
You have Art Garfunkel. I have Ray Charles, Michael Palin. We both have O.J. Simpson in there. So yeah, the first 6, 7, 8, there's tons of great stuff.
Yeah. Again, that was kind of hard. And then I think the bottom of our lists are also pretty similar.
Yeah. I mean, we both settled on Jill Clayburgh for the worst episode of the season, sadly. Mary Kay Place is down there, and Hugh Hefner. You have Mary Kay and Hugh Hefner as the second and third worst, respectively. I have them as third and fourth because I don't know what your issue is, but Richard Dreyfuss was a solid number 2 second worst episode of the season. I'm sorry.
See, this is a case where anyone who listened to that episode, and if you haven't, please go back and listen to it so you can understand fully the irrational hatred that Brad has for Richard Dreyfuss.
But you've got him like 5 or 6 episodes deep. Like, how did you like that better than the Buck Henry finale or
because
Steve Martin? I don't know. You didn't like it either.
But it had some really strong sketches for me. Like, one of my favorite sketches of the season is in there. Yeah. Yes. To me, I liked it better than the Buck Henry episode because at least it was different. I didn't know what the laugh beats were going to be throughout the entire episode. And that really was my problem with the finale.
Okay.
So.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, let's dive into the best bits then, because this is going to be a discussion, I'm sure.
Yes. Number 1 for both of us, number 1 with the bullet was Theodoric of York, which for me is still one of my all-time favorite sketches. Steve stands out as the performer in this piece, and it's just so well written, so well done. And then knowing the backstory of this piece and how Tom Davis came up with it while visiting Don Novello in the hospital just added to it for me. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, classic sketch. And this took my number 1 over number 2 by just a little bit because it was new.
Yeah.
That we hadn't seen this before. So that's why I put this as my number 1. It's funny, 2 and 3 sketches for us, interchangeable again.
Yep.
I had the Fest Drunk Brothers, the third time we saw them with Steve Martin from the Blues Brothers episode, followed by the first time we saw Olympia Cafe, which I still think is the best of all time. You had them reversed, Olympia Cafe number 2, Fest Drunk Brothers, but our top 3, again, it's very funny, very similar.
And funny, the reason that I put the Olympia Cafe above the Fest Drunk Brothers was because it was its initial outing. And I thought it was so strong right out of the gate that I gave that the edge over the third time of the Fest Drunk. Okay. But yeah, very, very close and so good, both of them.
I chose Bill Murray for number 4. Nick the Lounge Singer, again, the Robert Klein episode. I think it's great. Bill is great. I think the host is really good. I think it's the best performance from a host. Granted, they're always in a very small role, but Robert Klein was great in that sketch. And of course, it's, the one we always see, Star Wars. So it's the most iconic one. And then this is another one. After here, it could be anything in the number quote unquote 5 spot. Yeah. I went with Nerd Prom from the finale with Buck Henry. It was my favorite nerds of the season. I thought it clicked on all cylinders, and I love the fact that Buck and Jane were so good in it.
Yeah.
That I had to put that in my top 5.
Yeah, I mean, I can't argue with either of those. They were both in my list of top sketches of the season that I was trying to parse through. For me, I did go number 4 a little, I don't want to say outside the box, but different with the David Susskind show.
I'm glad you put it there.
It's a bit that had everyone in the cast. It did not have the host, so you liked it a little bit more because Richard Dreyfuss was the host that week, so you would have not liked it had he been in it. But this is a bit where everyone's doing an impression, which I thought was a lot of fun. And the women are doing impressions. They're playing the mothers of the guys. So I mentioned it earlier with Jane as my best bit or best impression. as Tom Snyder's mom. I just really liked how they went at it with these impressions, these characters that we've seen before, and then adding the element of their mothers who are just doing the same impression. I thought it was a lot of fun and really well done by the entire cast.
It was. It was. And I mentioned it when we talked about it. I just love seeing the cast and just the cast.
Yeah, I agree.
It was great.
I agree. And then number 5 for me was La Dolce Gilda, because I think
it's bold. It's bold. I love it, but it's bold.
I think, well, for me, I love Schiller's Reels. And the introduction of Schiller's Reels this season was wonderful. And I wanted to recognize that.
Sure.
And I feel like the Acid Generation one I really liked. Obviously, Don't Look Back in Anger. But La Dolce Gilda for me is one that I'm not the biggest Gilda fan. Everyone, automatically loves Gilda. I think she's wonderful. But for me, this piece, what I really liked about it was
you hate Gilda. Copy that.
Was that Schiller? No one buys your crap, by the way. That's the.
I don't know.
They know it.
Write in, tweet at us, let us know. Do you buy our crap? We're genuinely curious. Because if you don't say anything, I'm going to think you all buy my crap.
No one tweets anymore. That's why I gave them the email address. No, I thought it was the way, again, it kind of gets across all of Schiller's sensibilities, right? All of this like European influence that we've seen of him. I think it's a very well done piece. Like I talked about when we talked about that bit in that episode. And I just think it's so well done. And it's different. It's a different piece. Again, going back to what I really liked about season 2 was it's not all the same. So that was my number 5 bit.
Like I said, once you get past 3, 4, it's like there's literally a list of a dozen that could take those final spots. I think I have about like another like quote unquote honorable mention, like 8 or 9. Let's just run through them. I think we'll talk about them and just run through them. But I had 2 Don't Look Back in Anger and La Dolce Vita, 2 Schiller's Reels. Little Chocolate Donuts, Dancing in the Dark, Hey You, the Radio performance, musical act is the best bit. The first time we saw Judy Miller, the Judy Miller Show from Charles Grodin, Consumer Probe from Charles Grodin, the Christmas episode where it's Jane and Erwin Mainway.
Yeah.
E. Buzz Miller's Art Classics, another one from the Miskell Spillman episode. And then I had the Tomorrow Show with Art Garfunkel with when Tom exposes Art Garfunkel's character.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a lot of the same as you. I had that Tomorrow Show, the Acid Generation bit, the Nick the Lounge Singer from Robert Klein's episode, Hey You, great piece, E. Buzz Miller, the Art Classics. I had the Simon and Garfunkel, where Charles Grodin plays Garfunkel and Paul Simon stops him. That is probably my favorite Paul Simon bit of all time. Samurai Psychiatrist, which I really liked. Coneheads Family Feud, which was a fun way to introduce different elements to the Coneheads. The Young Caucasians from the Ray Charles episode, which I thought was a really good bit. Again, that had the entire cast in it. And then Don't Look Back in Anger. There are a lot of sketches and a lot of bits from this season that are excellent and outstanding.
Indeed.
And a lot of fun. So yeah, this was hard for me. And I realized now, like,
it was definitely hard.
In my mind, Nerds Prom was on my list and I didn't actually put it there, but it was there as well. So
I think more interesting than trying to talk through all these sketches that everybody knows and loves and argue, like, is it, 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever, is I think there's also a really good amount of underrated or forgotten sketches from this season.
Yeah.
Dive into a couple of those, of like sketches that you might not remember or people might not remember that were actually really surprisingly good. Any that jump out to you?
Well, the number one that jumped out to me, and I already talked about it, was the David Susskind Show, just as far as being underrated and forgotten. But another one that I had for that was Stunt Baby.
Yeah.
I really liked Stunt Baby. I thought, again, Bill playing his director character and Buck were both excellent in that. How about you? What was an underrated or forgotten bit for you?
Well, one of the ones that I mentioned in my favorite episodes from Robert Klein, the Attack of the Killer Lobster, just that ending, it's so out of there and out of left field. And I feel like a lot of people might not know of it because it's just such a weird thing for SNL that, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe a lot of people do know it. You mentioned Young Caucasians. That's an amazing sketch that I feel like a lot of people don't remember from the Ray Charles episode. There's that Hercules recording sketch.
I had that on my list too. Yes.
That's a really good one. And there's a couple kind of callbacks to old school SNL. I say old school even though it's only season 3. There's 2 live commercials they do that I thought were great. One is from the horrible Jill Clayburgh episode. It was the only best bit we had. Nutrafix, when Jane Curtin does a solo to camera commercial for Nutrafix, the injection vitamins or injection meals. And from the O.J. Simpson episode, Dan doing Mohawk Master.
Yeah, you love that one. Yeah.
It's so funny. It's so obscure. So they were a bunch, and I had a couple other ones, but those are probably the biggest ones that I liked the most that were kind of forgotten or people might not know of.
Yeah, there are so many that kind of fly under the radar and don't, make it to those anniversary shows, let's say, because there was a lot. There was a lot for this season.
There's a lot. I agree with you too that Simon and Garfunkel, Charles Grodin, as Art Garfunkel is hilarious. It's so good. I think, again, it's an episode because not a lot of people, I think, know the episode because it is so weird, or it has that weird connotation like, oh, Charles Grodin was a horrible host and got banned from the show and all this. So no one goes back and revisits it if they're looking for shows. So then they never see this sketch.
Which is a hilarious
shame. Yeah. Yeah. Good stuff.
It is. I think it's an interesting season to talk about because I think coming into this season, we had high expectations, and it was actually more fun that I didn't love everything all the time, to be honest. Mm-hmm. Like there were episodes where I was just getting through it, watching it. I was like, oh, I can't wait till this is over. And then there were episodes like the Steve Martin Blues Brothers episode where you want to watch it again and again because it's so good.
So what did you like the most then? You're looking at season 3 as a whole.
Okay.
What did you like the most from it?
I liked the pre-tape bits. Now I think both the commercials and Schiller's Reel and some of the Gary Weiss films we saw this season were some of the better Gary Weiss films that we will ever see. So
Swan Ballet.
Yeah. And I think, we talked about this coming into this season. They get this influx of money for the production value that you see in commercials like Hey You, Little Chocolate Donuts, and there's so many. I mean, there are a lot that we didn't talk about too, like Angora Bouquet, which they play a couple of times.
Swill.
Yeah. Pocket Pal. Mm-hmm. Royal Deluxe 2. There's so many great commercials that came out of this season that really was my favorite part. And it kind of, when we got towards the end of the season and they were just repeats of commercials, that was a little depressing because I wanted to see more of these. Mm-hmm. But it made me excited for moving forward.
And something else, I don't think we've even talked about yet until now. We mentioned the Swan Lake Ballet. That's the last Gary Weiss film. We didn't mention it in the episode. We've seen the last Gary Weiss film. He did 6 this season. I think overall his average is pretty good. I'd say he went 3 for 6. The Buck Henry one was really good when we did the Meet the Contestants. Yep. He did Steve Martin in LA.
That was good.
And then Swan Lake Ballet. But there's just so much going on this season. We kind of overlooked the fact that Gary Weiss's run has run its course. And as you mentioned, now we're kind of transitioning into the Schiller's Reel. And Mr. Bill will come back in season 4.
Right. And Schiller's Reels are just, he starts out so strong with the Acid Generation film, which was excellent.
Yeah.
And then Don't Look Back in Anger and La Dolce Gilda, and realizing that all of that happened in a very short amount of time is that was surprising. I don't think I realized how close all of those were to one another. How about, was there anything that you learned this season that you didn't know coming into it?
I learned that I may have given this season a little more credit than it deserved. I think I enjoyed it. I definitely enjoyed it. But I think thinking of the highs, which is one of the things I liked the most, I thought the individual standout moments. I enjoyed the highest highs we've seen so far this season. It's one of the things I really enjoyed. But because of that, I think as an overall blanket thought of season 3, I might have given it a little bit too much credit.
Yeah.
Also, I learned that I really hate Richard Dreyfuss. That was the other thing I was surprised to learn.
That was actually something that I learned this season too, was how much you dislike Richard Dreyfuss.
No,
for no good reason.
No. There's no good reason. I don't know. What about, did you learn anything? Aside from my hatred of Richard Dreyfuss?
I guess this is a surprise / learned how there were a lot of swings and misses this season, but it didn't feel like, I think in seasons past, the swings and misses were coming primarily from O'Donoghue. So they were big swings and they were really far out there and really of a Michael O'Donoghue flavor. And this season, it felt like there were more, like they were just trying different things that were falling flat quickly. Like there were some sketches that died 10 seconds into the sketch. You were like, well, this is going nowhere, and you can tell. And so I think that kind of clouded my perception of the entire first bit of the season anyway, where there was a lot of just stuff that was falling flat for whatever reason.
I could see that. You know what I was surprised at looking at the season on a whole? I feel like there was really a lack of really great musical guests, or at least performances. Maybe the names were higher, but in going through the musical performances, I was just kind of shocked at just how many either I didn't like or was unimpressed by.
Yeah.
Meatloaf, and you see the name, you think Meatloaf 1978, this is going to be a great performance. Not so much. Jackson Browne was okay.
He was okay.
Eddie Money was decent.
I did like I liked Eddie Money's performances, but it didn't save that show.
Again, just looking back, as a whole, I was kind of surprised at the level of performances from the musical guests.
Yeah, that's a good call, because I think there are some that we didn't know necessarily that came on and didn't impress. And then there were some, again, I think it speaks to that expectations, where you have high expectations of some of these musical guests and they didn't deliver. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing that surprised me, and you've mentioned it and called me out on this a bunch, is I'm surprised how many of these episodes made my worst top 10 of the first 3 seasons. I've got 3 of the 10, and the Hugh Hefner episode is not that far behind.
Yeah.
And that was surprising to go back and look at a season that I think I like so much, I think is one of the best of all time, could have so many episodes on the bottom of my all-time list.
Yeah. High highs and low lows, man.
I'm not worried, because I'm sure once we get to season 5, a lot of these will get knocked out of the top 10. So it's only temporary. Don't worry, Richard Dreyfuss. I'm sure you'll drop out of the top 10 at some point.
But I think it is surprising, that you have more episodes from season 3 than you do from season 2. Or you have as many. You have as many from season 3. Yeah. And I think, that would not have been the guess coming into this season.
No, it would not have. I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. All right, last one, Gary. We're 3 seasons in now.
Yeah.
Let us rank our favorite seasons. What's your favorite season so far?
Season 2. Yeah. How about you?
It is season 3. I go season 3, season 2, season 1. Even most of the bad episodes, or quote unquote bad episodes, were good and fun.
Yeah.
So I do give season 3 a slight nod.
Yeah.
Over 2.
Yeah, I go 2, 3, 1. But I don't think it's not a big gap between 2 and 3, really. Mm-hmm. Because 3 strong points were so strong. Keep saying it, but it's just the truth.
Yeah.
Well, that's it, Brad.
Season 3 in the books.
Season 3's in the books.
We'll be back next week with season.
No, we're not.
Almost.
Actually, we will be off for a week, taking a week off, and then we will be back with a special episode highlighting the life and career of Michael O'Donoghue with guest
that'd be fun.
Dennis Perrin, who literally wrote the book on Michael O'Donoghue.
Yes, our old buddy Dennis will be back. I'm looking forward to that.
Me too.
And we have a couple other special episodes until we're back. We're going to start up season 4 in a little bit in the fall, so a couple months we'll be back. So in the meantime, catch up on episodes you might have missed. In all seriousness, if you get a chance, please do leave a rating and a quick review. It really helps just try to get the word out when people look for the show. And I don't know, try to take a little time off.
Yeah, that'll be good. So we'll be back in 2 weeks with Dennis Perrin talking about Michael O'Donoghue. Until then, good night and have a pleasant tomorrow.
Good night and have a pleasant tomorrow. And Robert Klein has that Attack of the Atomic Tomatoes ending. Oh, what'd I say?
You said tomatoes again.
Oh. Well, I mentioned in my favorite episode the whole Attack of the Killer Tomatoes ending.
Lobsters.
I think it's just so obscure. I had the Attack of the Killer. I fucking wrote tomatoes on my thing. That's the problem. And I had the whole Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. Give me the question again.
The Not Ready for Primetime podcast is a 2 Pints Productions production. Produced and edited by Brad and Gary. Thought about by Brad and Gary. Please rate and review. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.